We have a question now from Andrew Pereira for Peter Carlisle.
Mr. Carlisle, the State Land Use Commission recently approved Ho'opili and Koa Ridge, two controversial projects that would put thousands of housing units and related developments on prime agricultural land. Both projects will eventually come before the city and the city council. Do you support either or both of these projects? Why or why not?
As a matter of fact, I do, and I think it's because we have an obligation ultimately to allow that city to grow the way it was intended to grow when we put infrastructure out there involving basically affordable housing that we've got now, as well as the Croc Center, as well as the large retail stores that are there. The whole idea was to transfer from downtown Honolulu to have another second urban city. And it's critical for us to have that. Ho'opili is part of that. It's going to be part of transit-oriented development in that area. Then the same thing is true for Koa Ridge, although Koa Ridge is a couple miles up. If you have the right type of circulator system, which can be accomplished by a bus a lot less expensively, then you might have the ability to do it, or you could have a drop-off kiss-and-ride attitude that might be adopted by some of the people. But frankly, those things are going to be critical for us in the long run in terms of allowing people to have affordable housing opportunities out there. And so Ho'opili was around for a long, long time. We didn't deal with them. We didn't essentially, I didn't go and speak before the Land Use Commission on them and said that I wouldn't do it. But now that it's been done, then I think we have an obligation to continue the process that was started by promising the people the second city and giving them the affordable housing that they need. And that's another thought, is that some of this stuff is going to be affordable housing. I will work with those people to make sure that they've got sufficient open green space, efficient open affordable housing as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Carlisle. Mr. Cayetano, your rebuttal.
I oppose the reclassification of Ho'opili. We have about 4,500 acres of prime ag land on this island, some of the best land in the state. Now with the reclassification of Koa Ridge and Ho'opili, half of that is gone. Now, I support building affordable housing, and there are about 30-something thousand acres of ag land that's laying fallow because it doesn't have water, it doesn't have what's needed to really grow things. Build homes there, not on prime ag land. Today, the 4,500 acres has been reduced to maybe 2,000, and that's, in my opinion, a big mistake.
Thank you, Mr. Cayetano. Mr. Caldwell, 1 minute.
No, I do support Ho'opili and Koa Ridge, and it is much about affordable housing. Our general plan, which is about 10 years old since it's been revised, said growth should happen on the west side. By 2030, 60% of the population will live there. And it is about building housing. If we don't build enough, it's not affordable. Our children, our grandchildren can't afford to live here. So I do support it. And I believe that anything inside the urban growth boundary is open for some form of development for housing. Having said that, I'd fight to keep growth going outside the urban boundary. And more importantly, inside the urban boundary, I'd work with both D.R. Horton for Ho'opili and Castle McCook with Koa Ridge to make sure that there's still ag around these developments, because you can have ag in the city. Many great cities do this, and we can do this in Honolulu too.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. And now it's time for the candidates to ask questions of each other. The response time to each question is 1.5 minutes. There is no rebuttal. Mr. Caldwell, you get to ask the first question of the opponent of your choice.
Thank you. This question is for Peter. Peter, on the Mike Buck's talk radio last week, you didn't even know that the county charges a fuel tax to pay for road repairs. Yet your administration actually raised the tax, and according to Civil Beat, will have raised it by 36% by 2014. Is this your version of sound fiscal management?
The answer is that we use those particular funds precisely for road repairs. And so using that, now that everybody is calling for road repairs, including yourself, is sound fiscal policy. It's something that's designed specifically to be used for that type of repair, and considering the new technologies that we now have and an actual plan for preserving roads that are in less repair, and then now dealing with the very worst roads, but not exclusively, and going and using the ones that are in the middle grade to try and give them longer life rather than 7 or 8 years, bump it up to 15 or 16 years and sometimes even more. It's very, very sensible for us to use that particular opportunity and those funds. For me, they come in sort of a general thing as highway funds, state and highway funds, but yes, that's the correct name for it, and I did not use that term and should have.
Thank you. Mr. Carlisle, you can now ask a question of one of your opponents.
Kirk, during the time you were managing director, your administration did nothing to get the city's affordable housing portfolio sold, even though your administration said that it would get done. You have even spent thousands of dollars on a consultant and nothing happened. My administration is selling the long-term lease for all 12 properties for $142 million after only 18 months. Could you tell everybody why you failed?
Peter, actually, you inherited the hard work that we put together. As you well know, when you came into the city, the groundwork had been laid for the selling of these projects. I had worked on it personally as the managing director. We had a few final hurdles to overcome that you know what they were in terms of dealing with HUD and some of the requirements on this large mortgage, and those problems were addressed. They couldn't be addressed while I was at the city because it involved mortgages that needed to be paid off. But to take credit for the hard work that not only my administration did, but even people who worked before I came to the city in 2010 on this issue, this is a long time coming. It's not something that just popped up when you showed up at the city. You know full well from the people you worked with that they were working hard on it before you arrived, and they were working hard on it before I arrived. Everyone deserves the credit here. No one person pats themselves on the back and says, I did it all. That's not our style here.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cayetano. Now it's your turn.
To ask a question?
To ask a question of
This
whoever.
is from Mr. Caldwell, or Kirk. Kirk, as managing director in 2009, you proposed to raise the homeowners' property tax rate to 9%, but the council approved a 5% increase. You eliminated the homeowners' tax credit. You increased the vehicle weight tax 2/3 from 3 to 5 cents per pound. You increased the fees for the zoo, bus fares, golf fees. I find it interesting that you should criticize Peter for that. My question to you is this. The subsidy, operating subsidy for the bus, for the rail system, is going to increase. The subsidy today is $140 million. This is for the bus. In 2030, it's going to be $462 million. 65% of that has to come from the general fund. How are you going to raise the money?
It's kind of ironic, Ben, that you're asking me about how I'm going to raise the money for the bus in 2030 when you're supporting a bus rapid transit proposal that's going to dump hundreds of more buses onto our roads. And as you well know, looking at the FEIS for rail, that actually the operation and maintenance costs for rail are dramatically different. In 2024, the operation and maintenance for rail will be about $100 million. In 2024 for buses, it's almost $300 million, close to the figure you talk about. I am for rail because I'm looking to try to control these operation and maintenance costs that you talk about so that we can become more efficient and plan for the future. And yes, we need an integrated bus system along with rail, but it's not all bus. You put more buses on the road, you're right, we're going to have a huge problem, and other mayors, long after we're gone, are going to have to address this. I don't want that to happen.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Caldwell, you can now ask a question of one of your opponents.
Okay, this question is also for Peter. And it deals with raising something that you didn't know about. When you were managing director, when your managing director took the action to waive the city's debt limit by more than 20%, isn't it true that you didn't even know about it?
No, it's absolutely true. I didn't know about it, and he had the authority to do that, and I wholeheartedly agree with what he did. One of the important things about being a manager is to have really good people around them who you can trust in the judgments that they make. And the judgment that he made was absolutely flawless. He did exactly what he should do, and as a result of that, I wholeheartedly concur with what he did. Doug Chin is a gifted administrator. He's gifted at what he does. He's exceptionally bright. He's not as good looking as I am, but frankly, he is somebody who I rely on every day and has been one of the finest managing directors that I've seen, and certainly I would compare his record with yours in a heartbeat.
Mr. Carlisle, you get to now have a question for one of your opponents.
Mr. Caldwell, how many years did you pay only $300 in property taxes for your multi-million-dollar home in Manoa?
You know, my wife and I are very passionate about historic preservation, and our home is on the Historic Register. Catherine Cruz came for the Mama Manoa tour, and We open our house to the public to see this home. We spend a lot of time and effort and money maintaining it. And we did participate in the program a couple of years after we bought the historic home. We have now no longer participate. We are paying the tax while still honoring the letter of the law, complying 100% in terms of maintaining the home. And the reason why we did it is that whenever the issue came up about historic preservation in this particular law, because I was in the program and I was the managing director, now running for mayor, it became a political football. I love this program. I don't want to hurt it. So we made a decision to pay the tax. And we'll continue to do so while honoring the letter of the law and preserving this home. So someone else, after we're gone, can preserve it for another 100 years. It's going to be 100 years in 2017.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Cayetano, you can answer a question of your opponent.
This is from Mr. Caldwell. I find it interesting that you should take Peter to task for not knowing about the exceeding the city's debt limit. Because actually, in March 2010, you were advised that the building of rail transit system would violate the city's debt limit of 20% of its operating budget. Your knowledge of this violation is documented in a letter you sent to Councilman Nestor Garcia, who chair of the Budget Committee of the City Council at that time. You never told the public about it. In fact, the public would not have known had not the star advertiser, Kevin Dayton, I think it was, obtained from the FDA its consultant's report. You talk about transparency, but you don't practice it.
When I was the managing director, as you mentioned, I did notify Councilman, the chair of the Budget Committee, Chair Garcia, and that was the proper, absolute proper thing to do. The council was notified. Not only that, I notified the mayor, because that's my job, to make sure that the mayor and the council, who represents the people of this city and county of Honolulu, knew that we're going to be exceeding the debt limit down the road. But I not only did it before it happened, I did it in advance. So I am open, I am transparent, and I notified them well before we actually exceeded. So I think I met the obligation of the city, met the obligation of the executive branch, and did what was required. Did not hide it at all.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Now it's a good time to take a brief pause. Coming up next, it's going to be your turn to ask what you want of the candidates. We'll be back in 90 seconds as KITV, civilbeat.com. The Honolulu mayoral debate continues.